Sometimes the scariest sounds aren't screams or footsteps. It's the sound of something quietly living inside your walls. You're watching Dark Story Files, where every story reminds you that real horror doesn't hide in the dark. It hides in the places you call home. In a quiet Ohio suburb, a man named Evan Miles moved into a small 2-bedroom rental after a rough divorce. The house was old but cheap, standing between empty lots and leafless trees that stretched skeletal fingers into the foggy night. The air smelled faintly of mildew, faintly of decay, and yet it carried the false promise of safety. On his first night, silence weighed heavy. The walls groaned with subtle creaks. Dust motes danced in the faint glow of a single lamp. The wallpaper along the hallway was peeling, curling like a warning, and the floorboards whispered beneath every step. He tried to tell himself it was just age, just loneliness, just the echo of a life falling apart. But even in daylight, the house seemed to breathe. 2 nights later, Evan was jolted awake by a soft, deliberate scratching inside the wall. Not rats, too methodical, too deliberate. The sound traveled along the hallway and stopped behind his bedroom wall at precisely 3:12 a.m., every night without fail. He recorded it once, hoping evidence would confirm his sanity. But on playback, the sound had vanished. Silence, punctuated only by the anxious rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then came the smell, damp, metallic, like rusted blood soaked into the wood. He tried sleeping in the living room. Even there, the wall behind him whispered. The sound of something shifting just out of sight, brushing against wood, testing boundaries, listening. It was patient, like it had all the time in the world. Driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, Evan tore a small hole in the drywall, expecting rodents or rot. Instead, he found another layer of wallpaper, then another, each layer slightly different, as if the house was rebuilding itself. And behind each layer, shadows seemed to move, breathing in the same rhythm he did. Night after night, the whispers grew. Not words, echoes of his own thoughts, twisted and warped, phrases he never spoke but somehow recognized. Dust swirled in unnatural patterns near the cracks, as though marking invisible footsteps. He stopped eating, stopped leaving the house, stopped trusting even the faint glow of daylight. All that remained was him and the walls, and whatever waited just behind them. One night, the drywall gave way on its own. Beyond it stretched a hallway identical to his own, but impossibly deeper, fading into an abyss of shadow. Wallpaper glowed faintly under an unseen light, and then at the far end, a figure appeared, himself, pale and still, eyes hollow like glass. It didn't move like a reflection. It didn't blink. It smiled, a slow, hollow grin that mirrored every fear Evan had ignored. From the darkness, a voice formed, a whisper that wasn't really spoken. "You finally made room for me." Evan understood in that instant. The house hadn't been haunted. It had been waiting, and the waiting was for him. When the landlord returned a week later, the house appeared untouched, furniture gone, walls pristine, not a sign that Evan had ever lived there, except the wallpaper, freshly layered from floor to ceiling, smooth, perfect, hiding secrets. Behind the walls, something waited, patient and quiet, ready for the next occupant. And in the silence, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the soft, measured pulse of something breathing just behind the plaster. In a small rural town in Pennsylvania, an abandoned cabin sat on the edge of a dense forest. Locals whispered it had been empty for decades, yet strange lights were sometimes seen inside at night. The cabin's wood was warped, paint peeling like scabs, and the windows caked in grime, reflecting only shadows of the surrounding trees. A writer, drawn by tales of the cabin's strange history, rented it for a week, hoping isolation would fuel inspiration. On the first night, silence wrapped the cabin tightly. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder than a scream, and the smell of damp pine and decay clung to the walls. By the second night, the subtle unease began. Objects in the cabin weren't where he left them. A notebook shifted, a pen rolled across the floor, yet there was no wind. At first, he told himself he'd misplaced things. By the third night, it was more deliberate. Chairs slightly rotated, logs moved in the fireplace. Even the door that had been closed slammed softly by unseen force. He began recording the nights, placing cameras in corners. On playback, nothing unusual appeared. No figures, no movement, just the whisper of floorboards in rooms he hadn't entered. And yet, he felt watched, a presence lingering in the air, not hostile, just patient, waiting. The nights grew heavier. The temperature dropped sharply in certain corners, frost forming inside windows despite warm summer nights. The shadows in the cabin stretched unnaturally, bending and shifting as if they had will of their own. One evening, the fireplace roared to life on its own. Embers scattered across the floor in slow motion, forming patterns, impossible symbols he couldn't recognize but felt drawn to. The writer began to lose time. Minutes passed like hours. Objects he swore he placed on a table were gone when he looked back. His own reflection in the grimy windows began to look distorted. The cabin wasn't haunted in a normal sense. It was alive, reshaping and erasing the boundaries between observer and observed. On the final night, cabin revealed its secret. The walls seemed to breathe. Floorboards lifted slightly, creating a rhythm like a heartbeat. Symbols glowed faintly along the warped wood. In that moment, he understood. The cabin had been waiting for someone sensitive enough to notice, someone whose mind could perceive it. It didn't consume people in a physical sense. It absorbed attention, folded reality around them, leaving a hollow shell outside while the consciousness lingered inside, trapped in perpetual observation. He realized then the cabin wasn't empty, and the silent guest he always felt was him. By morning, the writer was gone. Locals reported the cabin as quiet and empty as it always had been. A notebook lay on the floor, pages filled with incomprehensible scribbles and symbols glowing faintly as if written in the shadows themselves. The cabin waits. And every once in a while, a new visitor arrives, unaware that the walls themselves are alive and that silence can be more terrifying than screams. In an old Pennsylvania inn, a guest noticed a door at the far end of the hallway he'd never seen before. Faded and unmarked, it seemed almost out of place, like the building itself had tried to hide it. The wood was cracked, warped, and the paint had peeled away, revealing decades of neglect. Curiosity tugged at him, but exhaustion kept him from exploring. That night, a soft thumping echoed from the door, faint but deliberate, as if someone or something was restless behind it. The next morning, the door was slightly ajar. A chill leaked from the room, though the air outside was warm. Pushing the door open revealed a space that defied logic. Walls warped, floorboards twisting unnaturally, dust particles floating like static. Faint whispers seemed to drift from corners where shadows gathered. Each day, objects placed near the door, a chair, a suitcase, a newspaper, shifted as though the room itself reshaped reality around its edges. The whispers grew louder at night, unidentifiable but familiar, echoing thoughts the guest hadn't voiced aloud. The guest began noticing other oddities, mirrors reflecting hallways that didn't exist, carpets subtly rippling like liquid, and a faint, sweet smell that seemed to draw him closer. The room was alive, not in flesh, but in intent. It was watching, cataloging, folding reality to trap attention. By the last night, the door stood wide open, inviting him. The space beyond had become infinite, stretching past comprehension. And then he understood. The room had never been forgotten. It had waited patiently for someone to notice, someone whose mind it could claim, one thought at a time. The innkeeper later claimed the room didn't exist, that no floor plan ever included it. But in the hall, a faint draft escapes from the unmarked door, and travelers swear they hear whispers in the dead of night, echoing their own unspoken thoughts. The truth is, some fears don't vanish when the lights go out. They hide in shadows, in the walls, in the corners of your mind. And sometimes they're waiting for you to notice. Stay alert, because the real horror never truly ends if your mind is still racing. Hit that like button and subscribe. More stories are waiting in the shadows, ready to crawl into your thoughts. Turn off the lights if you dare. And join me next time for the next descent into darkness.